The first sound that autumn was not the wind. It was laughter. It rolled out of a crowded auction hall in a Montana copper town, spilled onto the wooden sidewalk, and followed two women all the way down the street. They were sisters, both widows, both wearing the same black dress they had worn to bury their husbands 6 months before. And they had just paid $10 for 120 acres of broken shale that no rancher in the valley would touch for free. The town had a name for them by then. The unlucky Ellsworth women. Some said the copper mine collapsed because of them. Some said their own kin had been right to turn them out. Most said they would be dead before the first snow. What the town did not know was that on the far edge of that worthless land, tucked beneath a shelf of pale limestone, there was a cave. Dry, high, facing away from the northern wind, and warm air came out of the mouth of it. Slow and steady, like breath. Like the mountain itself was still alive down there in the dark, waiting for somebody with the sense to walk in. Inside the cave, a wooden chest had been sitting for 10 years, waiting for someone to open it. If you love stories about quiet courage, about women the world counted out, about the winter that changed everything for a Montana valley in 1887, stay with me, because what those two sisters built on that ridge, no one saw coming. The auction hall smelled of pipe smoke and wet wool. October in Copper Bluff, Montana territory. The year was 1887. Outside, a thin rain worked its way across the tin roofs of the town. Inside, 40 men crowded onto wooden benches, waiting for the last parcel of the day. Adelia Ellsworth stood at the back wall. Her hands were folded. Her black dress was clean but old. The hem carried mud from the walk into town. She did not shift her weight. She did not glance at the door. She simply watched the auctioneer wet his pencil against his tongue and lift a folded map. Beside her, Louetta breathed too fast. "Adelia! We should sit down." "No. People are staring." "Let them." They had been staring for 6 months. Since the mine. Since the funeral. Since the day Nathaniel Ellsworth came riding up, with papers in his coat, and put 4 people on the road, with 1 mule, and a wagon, and no home. Let them stare a little longer. The auctioneer cleared his throat. "Final lot, gentlemen. Wolfstone Ridge. 120 acres. Broken shale. Cave on the north face. Poor grazing. Little farming value. Do I hear $10? Silence. A man in the front row laughed into his sleeve. $10, gentlemen. For the land, not the ghosts." More laughter now. Louder. The kind that spreads, because everyone is grateful to be laughing at something instead of the weather. Adelia lifted her chin. $10. The room turned. Every head. All at once. Like a rope had pulled them. Cyrus Broderick sat in the 3rd row. Big man. Beaver coat. Boots polished for church. He was the richest cowman in the valley, and he had made sure everyone knew it. He looked over his shoulder at Adelia, and his mouth opened into a slow, disbelieving smile. Then he laughed. Not a chuckle. A laugh. The kind that rolls out of a man's chest and takes up all the air in a room. $10 for a headstone, Broderick said. Sold to the widow. Louetta's hand closed around her sister's wrist. Adelia, please. Quiet. They're laughing at us. They've been laughing since March. Nothing new today. The auctioneer looked confused. He looked at Adelia. He looked at the deed. He looked at the room. Ma'am, you certain? I am. You've walked the property? No. You know what's up there? Enough. Another wave of laughter. A man near the window slapped his knee. Broderick shook his head and turned back to his neighbor and said something behind his hand that made three men grin. The auctioneer sighed. He was tired. It was late. He wanted his supper. The hammer came down. Sold. $10. Wolfstone Ridge to Mrs. Ellsworth. Adelia stepped forward. She counted out the money onto the table in silver coin. $10 was almost everything they had left. She knew it. Louetta knew it. The auctioneer counted twice because he could not believe it. He handed her the deed. Their fingers touched. His were warm. Hers were not. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "there's nothing up there." Adelia folded the deed into her coat. "That's what I paid for." She turned and walked out of the hall. Louetta followed. Behind them, the laughter went on for a while, and then, gradually, it stopped, because the men remembered that they had wives at home, who were also widows in a valley, where the mine had taken 40 men in one morning, and it was not, when you thought about it, a thing to laugh at for very long. But by then Adelia and Louetta were already on the wooden sidewalk, rain in their faces, walking east, toward the ridge. As they passed the front of Halloran's general store, two women were standing in the doorway. One had her hand at her mouth. The other whispered something behind it. Adelia heard the words she was meant to hear. The unlucky Ellsworth women. That was what the whole town called them now. Since March. The unlucky Ellsworth women. As if the mine had come down because two wives had failed to pray hard enough. As if grief were contagious. As if bad fortune were a smell they were carrying under their coats. Adelia did not turn her head. She kept walking, because turning your head was answering. And she was not going to answer that town. Not today. Not ever again. The mine had come down on a Tuesday in March. Adelia remembered because she had been peeling potatoes when the sound reached the ranch. A sound is not the right word. It was more like a pressure. A low thump that came up through the boards of the kitchen floor. She had set down the knife. She had walked to the window. She had seen the birds lift off the fence rail all at once. Then she had run. Louetta had come out of the barn holding Thaddeus by the hand. 6 years old, and still in his nightshirt, because he had been sick that week. His hair stuck up on one side. He looked at his aunt, and asked what the noise was, and Louetta said nothing, and Adelia said nothing, and the two women had run down the ranch road toward the mine. They had run for a mile. Winifred, 9 years old, had followed on the mule, small and silent, and clutching the mane, because that was who Winifred was even then. The quiet one. The one who watched. At the mine head, the dust was still settling. Men stood in a half circle around the shaft. Some were on their knees. One was praying. The company foreman had his hat in his hand, and he was saying the same thing over and over to any woman who came close. "Ma'am, we don't know yet. Ma'am, we don't know yet." Adelia had asked for her husband. His name was John. He was 38 years old. He had eyes the color of wet slate, and he had promised her a summer trip to see her mother in Iowa. The foreman had looked at his boots. "John Ellsworth was on the morning shift, ma'am." That was all he had said. Louetta's husband, Peter, had also been on the morning shift. 22 men were on the morning shift. None of them came out. They pulled bodies for 3 days. Then they stopped pulling, because the shaft was flooded, and it was no use. A minister came from Helena and stood at the edge of the pit, and read from Corinthians, and the whole town stood behind him, with hats in their hands, and afterward there was cold ham in the church basement, and no one spoke very much. Adelia and Louetta had walked home that night holding each other by the elbows, because neither of them trusted her own legs. Winifred did not cry. Thaddeus asked, at supper, where his father was. Louetta had opened her mouth, closed it, opened it, closed it. Adelia had knelt down next to the boy's chair. "Thad, look at me!" He looked. "Your father is not coming home." "Not tonight. Not any night. He is with God now, and God is a good place, and you will see him again a long time from now. Do you understand?" Thaddeus had blinked at her. "But I saved him a biscuit." "I know you did. He likes the ones with butter." "I know. Can I still save it?" Adelia had picked up the biscuit and held it in her palm. It was still warm. She had wrapped it in a napkin. She had set it on the mantel. "You can save it as long as you want." It was still on the mantel a week later, when Nathaniel Ellsworth rode up. Nathaniel was John's cousin. He was a thin man, with a thin mouth. He wore a black coat that was too big for him, and a hat that was too small. He had never liked Adelia, because she was educated, and had once, at a family dinner, corrected his pronunciation of the word epitome, and he had never forgiven her. He tied his horse to the fence. He walked up the porch steps. He did not knock. He came into the kitchen holding a leather folder. "Adelia." "Nathaniel." "I've come about the property." "Sit down." "I'll make coffee." "No, thank you." She had known then. She sat down instead. She folded her hands on the table. She waited for him to say it. He said it. "The ranch belongs to me now." "On what grounds?" "John's father left it to the eldest male heir in the Ellsworth line." "That's me." "John owned this land, Nathaniel. He paid for it. He put every fence post in. He owned it in name. The title reverts. My lawyer has the papers." "Show me." He showed her. She read them twice. Slowly. Her lips moved the way they did when she was reading something difficult. Louetta stood in the doorway with a dish towel in her hand and did not move. The papers were what he said they were. Adelia set them down. "How long do we have?" "A week." "A week? I'm being generous." "Some men would have said tomorrow." "You are being many things, Nathaniel. Generous is not one of them." He had left without answering. They had 1 week to pack a life. Adelia stood on the porch and watched him ride off. Louetta came out and stood beside her. The two women watched the road for a long time and did not speak. Finally Louetta said, "What do we do?" Adelia said, "We think." She thought for 4 days. On the 5th day, she went to the auction listing at the courthouse and read every parcel that was for sale. She copied down the ones that were cheap. There were 3. One had a foreclosed cabin. One was river bottom that flooded every spring. One was 120 acres of shale on a ridge nobody wanted. She remembered something John had said. 2 summers before, he had ridden out looking for a stray heifer, and had come back at dusk, with a strange look on his face. He had washed his hands at the pump. He had come inside. He had sat down at the table. He had said, "Delaware. There's a cave up on Wolfstone. Big one. Dry. Air comes out of it warm." She had said, "Warm?" He had said, "Warm. Like breath." She had said, "That's not possible." He had said, "I'm telling you what I felt." Then he had eaten his supper, and they had never spoken of it again. But she remembered. On the 6th day, she counted their money. $22 and change. On the 7th day, she and Louetta packed the wagon. They took the mule. They took 2 blankets. They took the iron kettle and 3 cooking pots and the axe, with a cracked handle and a coil of rope. They took the children's clothes. They took John's Bible, because Winifred asked, and Peter's pocket watch, because Louetta could not leave it. They took a bag of cornmeal, and a slab of salt pork, and half a wheel of hard cheese. They took the biscuit off the mantel. Thaddeus wrapped it in a fresh napkin, and put it in his pocket. They did not take much else. There was not much else to take. The neighbors watched them go, from behind their curtains. No one came out. No one waved. One woman, Mrs. Peabody from the next farm over, opened her door, as they passed, and started to say something, then closed it again, without a word. Louetta had cried then. Just once. A single hard sound in her throat like she had been hit. Adelia had not looked at her. She had kept her eyes on the mule's ears. Because if she looked at Louetta she would break, and she could not afford to break yet. The auction was 3 days later. The ridge was 5 miles east of town. The wagon climbed slowly. The road was not a road. It was a scar in the shale. Loose rock slid under the mule's hooves, and the wagon wheels ground against stone, and every 50 yards Louetta had to get down, and lead the animal by the bit, because it did not want to go up. Winifred sat in the wagon bed with Thaddeus. She was reading to him. She had brought 2 books. The Bible, and a small brown book called Little Women, which had belonged to her mother when her mother was a girl. She read the part about Beth and the piano, because Thaddeus liked pianos, and she did not stop reading even when the wagon lurched and the pages jumped. Thaddeus listened with his hand in his coat pocket. The biscuit was in the pocket. He did not eat it. He never ate it. He just kept it there. When? Yes. Where are we going? Up. Up where? Up to the top of the hill. What's on the top of the hill? I don't know yet. Is it a house? No. A barn? No. Then what? Winifred closed the book. She looked at her brother. She was 9 years old, and she had the eyes of somebody twice that. Thad, Mama says we're going to make it a house. So it's going to be a house. Because Mama says. Thaddeus considered this. Then he nodded. Because Mama says. That was enough for a 6-year-old boy in a wagon on a shale road in October. That was more than enough. The ridge came up on them at the third bend. It rose gray and hard against a gray sky. No trees. No grass to speak of. Just shale and wind, and one twisted cedar leaning off the western face like it was trying to walk somewhere, and had given up halfway. Louetta stopped the mule. She looked up at the ridge. She looked at her sister. Adelia. I know. There's nothing here. I know. We just spent everything we had left on nothing. Adelia climbed down from the wagon. Her boots crunched on the shale. She walked a few steps forward and shaded her eyes with her hand and looked up. She was looking for something. She did not know what. She walked another 20 paces. The wind lifted her hair off the back of her neck. It was cold, and it smelled like snow that had not fallen yet. Then she saw it. Halfway up the north face, tucked under a shelf of pale limestone, there was a dark place. Not a shadow. A hole. Wide enough for a wagon. Tall enough for a horse. And around the edges of that dark place the shale had been worn smooth, as if something had been coming and going for a very long time. She stood still. Behind her, Louetta was still speaking. Adelia, did you hear me? I said we spent everything. Adelia did not turn. Louetta, come here. What? Come here. Louetta came. She followed her sister's gaze up the face of the ridge. She saw the dark place. She stopped talking. That's the cave John saw. Yes. You knew it was here. I hoped. You hoped. Yes. Louetta let out a breath. She looked at the cave. She looked at her sister. She looked at the two children in the wagon, one reading, one clutching a biscuit in his pocket like a saint's relic.
Adelia. Yes. If you're wrong about this, if that hole is wet, if it's full of bats, if it's a bear den, if it's anything except what you think it is, we're going to die up here.
I know.
Just so we're clear. We're clear.
Louetta nodded once. Then she went and led the mule. They climbed together. The cave mouth was cool. That was the first thing Adelia noticed. She stood at the entrance and put her hand against the stone, and it was cool, but not cold. Not the cold of wet rock. Not the cold of a dead place. A living cool. The kind you feel in a spring house in July. She stepped inside. The floor was smooth. Not smooth like carved. Smooth like walked. As if 100 years of feet had already done the work of making a path. She lit the lantern. The light did not reach the back wall. Louetta came in behind her, holding Thaddeus by the hand. Winifred followed. The four of them stood together in the mouth of the cave, and the only sound was the mule breathing outside, and the small drip of water somewhere deep in the dark. Thaddeus whispered,
"Mama." "Yes."
"It's warm." Adelia looked down at him. She had been about to answer. She had been about to say something practical about air currents, or geology, or the way a mountain holds its own temperature. Instead she said,
"Yes, it is."
Because it was. The cave was warm. Not summer warm. Not stove warm. But a good 10 degrees warmer than the wind outside. Air moved through it slowly, from somewhere deeper. She could feel it on her face. Air. Warm air. Coming out of the mountain. Just like John had said. Louetta was walking along the wall, with her hand on the stone.
"Delaware." "Yes." "It's dry." "Yes." "There's no drip on the walls." "I see. There's a crack up high. Look."
The smoke would go right up that.
Adelia looked up. High above them, a slit in the rock let in a needle of gray daylight. Louetta was right. A fire could vent through that. A fire could burn in here without filling the place with smoke. She lowered her lantern. Something caught the light. At the far end of the front chamber, tucked against the wall, where the shadow was deepest, there was a shape that was not stone.
Squared corners. Wood. Old wood. Blackened by time. A chest. Adelia walked toward it slowly. The children came behind her. Louetta stayed by the wall, with one hand still on the stone, as if to remind herself the mountain was solid. The chest was small. About the size of a large Bible. It sat on a flat rock like it had been set there deliberately. The lid was closed but not locked. A leather strap held it shut. The strap was cracked and stiff. Winifred crouched down beside it.
"Mama, don't touch it. I wasn't going to. Not yet."
Adelia knelt down. She set the lantern on the floor. She looked at the chest for a long moment. Then she unbuckled the strap. The leather crumbled under her fingers. She lifted the lid. Inside there was a folded oilcloth, a tin cup, a small pipe with the stem broken, a pocket knife with a bone handle, and a book, leather-bound, thin, the size of a hand. Adelia lifted the book out. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was small and careful. The ink was faded but readable. She held it close to the lantern. The first line said,
"My name is Elias Thorne. I came to this ridge in the spring of 1877. If you are reading this, then I have failed."
Adelia sat back on her heels. Louetta had come up behind her without a sound. Both women were looking at the page.
"Read it, Delaware. Not out loud. Not with the children. Then read it to yourself." Fast, Adelia turned the pages. Some of them were sketches. A cave mouth, a water channel, a plan for a small cabin with double walls. Notes in the margins about the way the smoke went up, about where the drip was, about the shape of the sun coming through the crack in April. Some of them were dates. Some of them were prayers. The last 5 pages were different. The handwriting was worse. The ink was blotchy. The words were shorter. The last page said, "Sick since October. Cough getting deeper. Walked to town Tuesday. Doc Brannon would not open the door. Said he could not risk it. Said I should go back to the mountain. I walked back. 6 miles. Fell twice. The cave keeps its promises. People do not. If someone comes after me." If someone finds this, the mountain is good. The mountain will hold you. It is only the town you must not trust. Elias Thorne. November 1877. Adelia closed the book. Her hand shook. Just once. She pressed it flat against her knee to stop it. Louetta whispered, 10 years. Yes. He was up here for 10 years, and then he died alone, because the town wouldn't help him. Yes. And nobody came looking. No. Not once. No. Louetta sat down on the floor of the cave. Right there. On the stone. She put her face in her hands. Thaddeus came over and touched her hair. Aunt Lou. She did not answer. Aunt Lou. Why are you crying? Louetta lifted her face. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. Because a good man died alone up here, sweetheart. And nobody deserves that. Thaddeus considered this. Then he said, "We're here now." Louetta looked at him. He looked back. He was 6 years old, and had a cold biscuit in his coat pocket, and he had just said the truest thing anyone had said all day. Louetta pulled him into her lap and held on. Winifred picked up the tin cup. She turned it in her hands. She looked at Adelia. "Mama, can I keep it?" "Yes." "For water?" "Yes." "For our water?" "Yes." Winifred put the cup back in the chest, very carefully, as if she were putting it back in a museum. Then she closed the lid. "We should bury him," she said. Adelia looked at her daughter. "We don't know where he is, Win. Then we should bury the book. Somewhere nice. So it's like we buried him." Adelia's throat closed for a second. She swallowed it down. "We'll find a place. In the spring. When the ground is soft. Okay." Winifred stood up. She walked to the mouth of the cave and looked out at the ridge, and the gray sky, and the wagon, and the mule, and the whole hard, useless piece of land they now owned. She said, without turning around, "It's a good cave, Mama." Adelia said, "Yes, it is." They built a fire that first night just inside the mouth of the cave. The smoke went up through the crack the way Louetta had said it would. It did not fill the chamber. It rose in a thin, steady line and disappeared into the mountain and did not come back down. They boiled water in the iron kettle. They ate hard cheese and a piece of the salt pork. Thaddeus fell asleep leaning against Winifred, who was still reading Little Women by firelight and moving her finger under the words for him even though he could not hear her any more. Louetta sat with her back against the stone wall. "Delaware." "Yes." "How many months of winter do we have?" 5. Maybe 6. "And how much money is left?" $12. 12. "And change." Louetta laughed. It was a small, dry laugh. It came from a very tired place. $12, 2 children, a mule, and a dead man's book. And a cave. And a cave. The fire popped. Somewhere deep inside the mountain, the water dripped. Adelia listened to it.
drop, pause, drop, pause, drop, like a clock that had been running for a very long time, and did not care whether anyone was there to hear it. She thought about Elias Thorne. 10 years alone on this ridge. Building, fixing, writing, then walking 6 miles in the cold to knock on a door that would not open. The cave keeps its promises. People do not. She said it in her head. Then she said it out loud, quietly, to the fire. Louetta looked at her.
What? Nothing. You said something. I was thinking. Thinking what?
Adelia did not answer for a long moment. She watched Thaddeus sleep. She watched Winifred put her cheek down on top of his head. She watched her sister's tired face in the firelight. Then she said,
I was thinking that we are going to be all right up here, because the mountain is going to hold us. And I was thinking that we do not owe that town down there one single thing. Not one. Ever again.
Louetta looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded.
All right, Delaware. All right.
They slept in their coats. The fire burned low, but never went out. Winifred woke once in the night, and thought she heard the mountain breathing. Slow and steady. In and out. Like a big animal that did not mind them being there. She listened for a long time. Then she went back to sleep. The horse came the next afternoon. Adelia and Louetta had been outside since dawn. They were pacing off a spot for a sheep pen. They were figuring out where the woodpile would go. They were arguing gently about whether to widen the cave mouth or build a windbreak in front of it. Winifred was in the cave with Thaddeus, sorting their things onto the flat rocks Adelia had said would be shells. The horse came up the shale road at a walk. The rider was in no hurry. He wore a good coat. Not a rancher's coat. Not a miner's. A townsman's coat, gray wool, well cut. His hat was clean. His boots were clean. His horse was a bay gelding that looked like it had been groomed that morning. Louetta saw him first.
Delaware. I see him. Do we know him? No.
They stood side by side and watched him climb the last 100 yards. He stopped at a polite distance. He touched his hat brim.
Afternoon, ladies.
Adelia did not answer.
My name is Wendell Rourke. I represent the Copper Bluff Mining Company. I was hoping to have a word with the owner of this parcel. You're having it.
Rourke smiled. He had a good smile. Practiced. The corners of his mouth went up, but his eyes did not change.
Which one of you is Mrs. Ellsworth? I am. May I dismount? You may not.
The smile stayed.
Fair enough.
He shifted in his saddle. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He held it out. Adelia did not take it.
What is that? A survey map of this ridge and the ground beneath it.
And the company I work for has had reason, for several years now, to believe that there is a significant vein of copper ore running approximately 80 feet below the floor of the cave you're standing in front of. My employers would like to buy the parcel from you at fair market value, plus a considerable premium for the inconvenience.
Louetta's mouth opened.
Adelia's did not.
How considerable? $200.
Silence. The wind moved across the shale. $200 was more money than Adelia had ever held in her life. $200 was a small house in a nice town. $200 was passage to Iowa, and a year of rent, and school clothes for 2 children. She looked at the paper in his hand. She looked at the cave behind her. She looked at Wendell Rourke's clean boots. She said,
No.
Rourke blinked.
Ma'am, I don't think you heard me. I heard you. $200 for a piece of land you paid $10 for. That is a return most men would consider a miracle. I am not most men. No, ma'am. You are not. He tucked the paper back into his coat. Slowly. With care. He was not smiling now.
May I ask why?
You may.
Why?
Adelia stepped forward. Just one step. She was a small woman in a black dress on a cold ridge in October, and she should not have looked large, but somehow she did.
Because this land is not for sale. Not today. Not next month. Not next year. Not to your company, and not to any other company. And you can tell whoever sent you that Mrs. Ellsworth said so. Mrs. Adelia Ellsworth, widow of John, mother of Winifred, owner of Wolfstone Ridge. Say it back to me, so I know you heard.
Rourke did not say it back. He looked at her for a long moment.
Then he touched his hat brim again. The smile came back, but it was thinner now.
Mrs. Ellsworth, I hope you'll think it over. I have thought it over. There is a lot of winter ahead of you. I know how many months are in winter, Mr. Rourke. I hope you do.
He turned his horse. He rode a few paces. Then he stopped. He looked back over his shoulder. His voice, when it came, was quieter, almost kind, which was somehow worse.
Mrs. Ellsworth, my company has been waiting 5 years for this ridge to come up for sale. 5 years. We are patient men, and we are not accustomed to hearing no. Then this will be educational for you.
He almost smiled. Then he rode down the shale road, and did not look back again. Louetta waited until he was out of sight.
Delaware. Don't. $200. Don't say it. That was a house. That was a life. That was... I know what it was. Then why?
Adelia turned to face her sister. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was not.
Because, Louetta, if a company has been waiting 5 years for this ridge, then this ridge is worth a great deal more than $200. And if I sell it to them today for $200, I am doing exactly what everyone in that auction hall thought I was too stupid not to do.
Louetta looked at her. Then she looked at the ridge. The bare shale. The dark mouth of the cave. The one twisted cedar. She let out a long breath.
Delaware. Yes. That man is going to come back. I know. He is not going to come back alone. I know that too. What do we do?
Adelia turned toward the cave. Winifred was standing in the entrance, holding Thaddeus's hand. Both children had heard everything. Winifred's face was very still. Thaddeus was pressing himself against his sister's side. Adelia looked at her children. She looked at her sister. She looked at the last thin light of the October afternoon lying gold on the top of Wolfstone Ridge. She said,
"We build faster."
Adelia woke before the light. She did not remember falling asleep. She remembered the fire. She remembered Rourke's clean boots. She remembered saying we build faster. Then nothing. Then this. Gray at the mouth of the cave. Louetta already up. The kettle on the stones. Winifred wrapping her feet in strips of an old flour sack, because her boots were coming apart at the toe. Adelia sat up. Her back hurt. Her hands hurt. Her hip hurt from the stone floor. Everything hurt in the way things hurt when you are 36 years old and you have not slept on anything soft for a week. She stood up anyway, because if she did not stand up first, Louetta would ask if she was all right. And Adelia had decided a long time ago that Louetta was never going to ask her that question and get anything but yes.
Morning. Morning. Coffee? There's no coffee. Then what? Hot water. With a leaf in it. I found something that might be mint. Might be. Might be.
Adelia took the cup. She sipped. It was not mint. It was something greener. Something sharper. She drank it anyway. Because it was hot. Because Louetta had made it. Because it was Tuesday. Because they were still alive on Tuesday. She looked at the ridge in the gray light. She said, "We need timber." Louetta said, "I know." "We need it before the snow." "I know." "We need enough for walls, and a roof, and a pen, and a woodpile that will get us through 6 months." "I know, Delaware. There are no trees." Louetta looked at her. "I know that too." They needed nails, too, and a decent saw, and a small keg for the water they were going to collect, and 100 other things they did not have. Adelia did the math in her head that afternoon. $12, minus the 12 she had already promised Corbin for the sheep, left 0, which meant she had to go into town on credit, which meant she had to walk into Halloran's general store, which meant she had to look Ambrose Halloran in the eye and ask him for something. She dressed for it. She wore the black dress. She wore the hat. She braided her hair tight. She rode the mule down the ridge on a Friday morning and tied it to the post outside the store, and she went in. Ambrose Halloran was behind the counter. He was a thin, dry man of about 50. He had a mustache that had gone gray in one corner and stayed brown in the other, and he had eyes that never showed anything. Adelia had known him 12 years. He had shaken John's hand every Christmas since 1875. Since March, he had not looked her in the eye once. Today was no different. "Mrs. Ellsworth, Mr. Halloran, something for you. 6 pounds of nails, a small handsaw, a 10-gallon keg, a pound of coffee if you have it, 2 pounds of salt." He wrote it down. He did not look up from the paper. "That is $4.30. I can pay 2, ma'am." "I know." "That is not how the store works." "I know that too." He set the pencil down. He still did not look at her. He said, "Mrs. Ellsworth, I run credit for the ranchers who have been here 20 years. I do not run credit for parcels." She said, "This is not a parcel, Mr. Halloran. This is my home, and I will pay you the balance by December." He said nothing. She said, "Ambrose." He looked up then, just for a second, just long enough that she saw something move behind his face. Then he looked back down. He said, $2 now. Balance by December. If it is not paid by December, I will come up and take the mule. Do we understand each other?" She said, "Yes." He wrote it in the credit book. He wrote it slowly. He wrote her name, and he did not shorten it. He wrote Mrs. Adelia Ellsworth in a hand that would have been beautiful if it had been done for a nicer reason. He said, "Cost of goods, Mrs. Ellsworth. Cost of goods. That is all this is." She said, "I understand." She took the sack. She went out. She did not look back. But she thought, as she rode the mule up the ridge, with the nails clinking in the sack, that Ambrose Halloran had looked at her once. And that once was not nothing. The trees were down at the creek, 2 miles east. Cottonwoods along the water. Some old, some young, most bent by wind. The good ones had been cut long ago by whoever had lived in this valley first. What was left was mostly deadfall, but deadfall was what they needed anyway, because deadfall was already dry. The sisters walked it twice before they cut anything. They chose the trees they could handle. Nothing too thick. Nothing too far from the wagon track. They chose old logs that had already fallen and were lying half in the grass, silvered by weather. Then they started. The axe was cracked. Adelia bound the handle with a strip of wet rawhide so it would not split further. She swung. She missed. She swung again. She hit. A chip flew. Louetta held the log steady. They worked in silence. Because there was nothing to say. Because words used breath. Because every swing counted. Because when you have 5 months of winter coming, and no walls, you save your voice for the important things. Winifred came down the 3rd morning. She was 9. She was small. She was carrying the small hatchet.
Win. No. I can help. You can help by watching Thad. Thad's watching the mule. Aunt Lou said.
Adelia leaned on the axe. She looked at her daughter. Winifred looked back. Steady. Waiting. Then Adelia knelt in the grass and showed her how to hold a hatchet. Where the fingers go. Where the thumb goes. How the wrist stays loose. How the shoulder does the work, not the elbow.
Watch me. I'm watching. See the wedge. I see it. Small chops. Not big ones. Small ones. Rhythm. Rhythm. Yes.
Winifred tried. She hit her thumb. She did not cry. She sucked on it for a second, and then she tried again, and this time the hatchet bit clean, and a small pale chip of cottonwood spun off into the grass. She looked up. Her face was serious.
Mama. Yes. Did I do it? You did it. Show me the next one.
They dragged logs to the ridge with the mule. 1 log at a time. Rope around the middle. Mule at the front. Louetta at the mule's head. Adelia and Winifred behind, pushing with sticks, when the log jammed on a rock, which was every 20 feet, because everything on Wolfstone Ridge jammed on a rock. The trip took 90 minutes each way. 6 trips a day. Because 6 was what they could do before dark. The first week they moved 18 logs. The second week they moved 24. The third week Adelia's hands split open across the palms, and she wrapped them in strips of Peter's old shirt, and kept swinging. Thaddeus made a game of it. He stood at the mouth of the cave, and counted the logs as they came up. He gave each one a name. There was Big Sam, and Curly and the one with the knot. When Big Sam came up, he said, "Hello, Big Sam." When the one with the knot came up, he said, "Welcome home, the one with the knot." Louetta laughed the first time she heard him do it. She had not laughed in 6 months. The sound came out of her surprised. Like she had forgotten she owned that noise. Then she put her hand over her mouth and looked around, as if she had done something wrong. Adelia said,
"Lou, it's all right to laugh."
Louetta said.
"Is it?"
Adelia said.
"Yes."
But Louetta lowered her hand slowly, as if she were not sure, as if laughter was a coin she did not have permission to spend yet. The sheep came on a Thursday. They came from a rancher named Corbin, who was leaving the valley for good. He was going back to Missouri, where his wife's people were. He was selling everything he owned at half what it was worth, because he did not want to look at any of it one more day. Adelia went to see him, with the last of their money. She rode the mule. She wore her black dress. She wore her hat. Corbin met her at his gate. He was a tall man, with a beard gone gray in patches. He looked at her the way a man looks at a woman, when he cannot decide whether to feel sorry or to feel afraid.
"Mrs. Ellsworth, Mr. Corbin, I heard you were coming."
Word travels. Word travels fast when there's nothing else to talk about.
He led her to the sheep pen. 12 animals stood inside. Small ones, thin ones, 2 of them limping. One of them with a raw patch on its flank where something had scraped it against a fence. Adelia walked the pen. She looked at each animal. She did not touch them.
She did not need to touch them. Her father had kept sheep in Iowa when she was a girl. She knew what she was looking at. She was looking at animals that everyone else would have shot.
"How much?" 40 for the lot." I have 12.
Corbin blinked.
$12. $12.
He almost laughed. Then he looked at her face, and he did not laugh. He looked at the sheep. He looked at the road out of the valley. He said,
Ma'am, my wife has been on me for a month to just let these go and leave. I told her no. I told her sheep are money, and money is money. She said, Corbin, dead sheep are not money. Dead sheep are a smell in the summer.
Adelia waited. Corbin scratched his beard.
$12,
he said.
And you take them today. All of them, including the lame ones. And you never come back here asking me for a receipt. Done. Done.
He opened the gate. She drove the 12 sheep home along the shale road. It took most of the afternoon. One of the lame ones sat down twice, and would not get up, until Winifred, who had come partway down the ridge to meet them, sat on the ground beside it, and spoke to it very softly in a voice Adelia did not know her daughter had. Winifred said,
You are safe now. You are safe now. Get up.
The sheep got up. They came into the cave at dusk. All 12. Their small hard hooves clicked against the stone. Their voices filled the front chamber with a sound like nothing that had been in that cave for a long time. Thaddeus stood by the fire watching them. He said,
Mama.
Yes. We have sheep. Yes. We have 12 sheep. Yes. We are farmers now.
Adelia sat down by the fire. She was too tired to stand another minute.
She said, Yes, Thad. We are farmers now.
He nodded once. Very solemn, as if he had been promoted. The dog came in the rain. It was the 4th week.
A cold rain, more sleet than water, driven sideways across the ridge by a wind that was not quite winter yet, but was practicing. Adelia was inside the cave, with Winifred fitting shale slabs into the wall of the sheep pen. Louetta was outside, with Thaddeus moving firewood under the overhang before it got soaked. Thaddeus heard it first. A whimper. Low. From the rocks below the cave mouth. He stopped stacking wood. He turned his head like a small dog himself.
Mama. Yes. Something's crying.
Louetta looked up. She listened. The wind made it hard to hear. But there it was again. A whimper. And then something between a whimper and a growl. And then nothing. Louetta set down the log she was holding.
Thad. Stay here. But. Stay here.
By the fire. Do not move.
He stayed. Louetta went down the shale slope with her hand on the wall for balance. The sleet stung her face. She was halfway down when she saw it. A dog. Or what had been a dog. It was lying against a boulder about 20 feet below the cave mouth. Medium size. Some kind of shepherd cross. Its coat was matted with mud and rain and something darker.
Its back leg was bent wrong. It had dragged itself up from somewhere, because there was a trail of blood on the shale behind it, thin and pink from the rain. Louetta crouched. She held out her hand very slowly. The dog lifted its head. It did not growl. It did not snap. It just looked at her with 2 brown eyes and made a sound in its throat that was not a bark and was not a whimper and was the saddest thing Louetta had ever heard. She said,
Oh! Oh, sweetheart.
She picked it up. It weighed less than she expected, wet and thin and shaking. She wrapped it in her shawl, and she climbed back up the shale one-handed, and she brought it into the cave. Adelia looked up from the sheep pen. She saw her sister. She saw the shawl. She saw what was inside the shawl. She said,
Lou.
Louetta said, I know. We cannot afford another mouth. I know. We cannot? Delegate, look at him.
Adelia looked. The dog looked back. His eyes were the eyes of an animal who had already decided he was going to die tonight and was surprised to still be indoors. Adelia put down the shale slab. She said, "Bring him to the fire." Thaddeus was standing very still by the woodpile. He had not moved since Louetta had told him not to. He was watching the dog. His mouth was open a little. His hand was in his coat pocket where the biscuit still was. Louetta laid the dog down on a folded blanket near the fire. Thaddeus came over. Slowly, on his knees. He did not touch the dog. He just knelt beside it and looked. The dog looked back at him. Thaddeus said, "Hi." The dog thumped his tail. Once, weakly, against the blanket. Thaddeus said, "Hi." Again, softer. The tail thumped again. Thaddeus turned his face up to his mother. "Aunt Lou, his leg is wrong." "I know, honey. Can you fix it?" "I don't know. I'm going to try." "Try hard." Louetta looked at him. She said, "I will." She washed the leg with warm water from the kettle. She used a strip cut from the bottom of her own petticoat because it was the cleanest cloth in the cave. She felt along the bone. It was not broken. It was pulled out of the joint, and there was a gash above it that was deep and needed stitching. Winifred came over holding Peter's sewing kit. Louetta looked up. "Where did you get that?" "I put it in the wagon." "In August, when Mama said pack?" "When?" "You said to pack useful things." Louetta blinked back something. She said, "Thank you, Win." She stitched the wound by firelight. 7 stitches. Thaddeus held the dog's head in his lap the whole time. The dog did not move. The dog did not cry. The dog looked at Thaddeus, and Thaddeus looked at the dog, and it was, Adelia thought, watching from across the fire, the first time she had seen her nephew's face come alive since March. Louetta tied off the last stitch. She sat back on her heels. She said, "He needs a name." Thaddeus did not look up. He said, "Ash." "Ash?" "Because he's the color of the fire when it's cold in the morning." Louetta and Adelia looked at each other over the boy's head. Neither of them spoke, because there was nothing to say, because a 6-year-old who has not spoken his dead father's name in 8 months had just named something out loud. And when a child names something, it belongs to him. And when something belongs to a child, you do not take it away, no matter what it costs. The dog stayed. Adelia did not say yes. Adelia did not have to say yes. The dog stayed. His name was Ash. Josiah Rennick came up the ridge on a horse the color of a rusted kettle. He came a week later. He was old. 60, maybe 70. Nobody in the valley knew for sure. His beard was white. His hands were dark and knotted. He wore a coat that had been patched, so many times it was more patched than coat. He tied his horse to the twisted cedar, and he walked up to the cave, and he stood outside for a moment before calling, "Hello, the cave!" Adelia came out. "Mr. Rennick." "Ma'am, you know my name." "Everybody knows your name, ma'am." "I imagine so." He looked past her. He looked at the cave mouth. He looked at the smoke coming out of the crack above it. He looked at the sheep in the pen. He looked at the woodpile, which was small but neat. He nodded slowly. He said, "You built that pen yourself?" "My sister and I." "With that mule?" "Yes." "How many logs so far?" 61. He whistled through his teeth. A soft short sound. Then he walked back to his horse and untied a bundle from the saddle. He carried it up to the cave mouth. He set it down on a flat rock. "What is this?" "Axe. Better one." "Mine's cracked, but this one belonged to my brother-in-law."
He's dead now. Died in the spring. Not the mine. Just old. He'd want it used. Mr. Rennick. Also seeds. Beans. Squash. Some turnip. Plant them in April, on the south side, where the shale is thinnest. You'll get something. Not much. But something. I cannot pay for these. Did I ask you to pay? No, but... Then do not offer.
She looked at him. He looked at her. His eyes were pale gray and very tired. He said,
Ma'am, I have lived on this ridge line for 41 years. I trapped through it. I hunted through it. I watched people come and go. I watched Elias Thorne come up here in 77, and I watched him not come down in 79. I knew he was up here alone. I did not go check on him. I could have. I did not. He paused. I am 72 years old. I am telling you this because I am not going to make that mistake twice.
Adelia's throat was tight.
She said, Thank you.
He said,
Do not thank me. Use the axe.
He walked to his horse.
He mounted with some difficulty. He turned the horse. Then he stopped. He looked back at her over his shoulder. He said,
Ma'am, there is a man down in the valley been asking questions about your parcel. Well dressed. Not local. Says he is with a mining company. I do not like the questions he is asking.
Adelia felt her stomach turn cold.
When?
Yesterday. And the day before. And the day before that. Thank you, Mr. Rennick. Do not thank me for that either. Just watch your road.
He rode down the shale. Adelia stood at the cave mouth holding the new axe. She watched him until he was a small brown shape at the bottom of the ridge. Then she turned and went inside and told her sister to fetch the rope because tonight they were going to build a bar across the cave mouth.
A real one. And it was going to be thick enough to keep out a horse. Winifred found the water on a Tuesday. She was in the back of the cave with Ash. She was teaching him to sit up. Ash could not really sit up because of his leg, but he could lean, and leaning was Winifred's idea of good enough. She leaned her back against the stone wall to demonstrate. The stone was wet. She turned around. She put her hand flat against it. It was not wet from a leak. It was wet from something slower. Something inside the mountain. A steady damp weeping down the limestone, gathering into a bead every few seconds, sliding down the wall, disappearing into a crack near the floor. She counted the beads. 1 every 8 seconds. Then she went to get her mother. Adelia came. She looked. She put her own hand against the stone. She said,
How long has this been here?
Winifred said,
I don't know. Maybe always. Always. Elias's book said the mountain gives water. I remember. Maybe this is it.
Adelia knelt down. She held Ash's tin cup under the crack near the floor. She waited. In 2 minutes, there was a swallow of water in the bottom of the cup. 2 minutes for a swallow. Not much. But not nothing. Louetta came in with Thaddeus. Adelia showed them. Louetta said,
Delaware. Yes. That is our water. That right there. Yes. If we can catch it. Yes.
They caught it. It took them 3 days. They cut tin from an old bucket rim. They flattened it with a stone. They bent it into a shallow channel using the flat side of the axe. Winifred worked the sharp edge with an old file until it did not cut anyone. Louetta wedged the channel into the crack with wooden shims and packed the sides with clay from the creek bed. The first time they tried it, the water leaked out the seam. The second time, it leaked out the other seam. The third time, it dripped in a slow, steady line into a wooden bucket that had once held pickled beets. Drop, drop, drop. Thaddeus lay on his stomach on the cave floor, with his chin on his hands, and watched the drops fall. He counted them. He counted 7. He said,
"Mama, it works."
She said.
"Yes."
He said.
"It really works."
She said.
"Yes, it does."
And she sat down on the cave floor next to her son, and she watched the drops fall, and she did not say anything else for a very long time. Rourke came back the first week of November. He did not come alone. He came with 3 men on horses. The men wore long coats. The men wore pistols on their belts, not hidden. One of them carried a rifle across his saddle. They came up the shale road at a walk. They stopped at the property line, if you could call the property line anything on a ridge, with no fence. Rourke got down from his horse. The other 3 did not. Adelia walked out to meet him. She left the axe in the cave. On purpose. She did not want him to see her holding it. She walked out empty-handed.
"Mr. Rourke, Mrs. Ellsworth, you are back." "I am."
"With friends."
"With colleagues." "Colleagues. Surveyors."
She looked at the man with the rifle. She said,
"Interesting tools your surveyors carry."
Rourke smiled that same practiced smile.
"Mrs. Ellsworth, my company has taken the liberty of arranging a preliminary geological survey of your parcel. It will require some minor excavation. Nothing that will damage your improvements. We can begin today. You will not be inconvenienced. You do not have my permission. Permission is not strictly required."
Under the Mineral Rights Code of the territory. Do not tell me what the Mineral Rights Code says, Mr. Rourke. I have read it.
He blinked. Just once. He had not expected that. He said,
"Then you know." "I know it says a company may survey unimproved territorial land with notice. This is not unimproved. This is patented. I hold the deed. It was recorded in the county book 6 weeks ago. You may not put a shovel in this ground without my written consent, which you do not have, which you will not have. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever."
Rourke's jaw tightened. Just a little. Just enough that Adelia saw it. The rider with the rifle shifted in his saddle. Adelia felt the sound of that shift in her spine. She did not move.
She said,
"Ride down, Mr. Rourke."
He said,
"Mrs. Ellsworth, you are making an enemy."
She said,
"I already have enemies. What is one more?"
He looked at her. She looked at him. Behind her, in the mouth of the cave, Louetta stood with the axe in her hands. Not raised. Just held. Just visible. Rourke saw. He turned. He mounted his horse. The 4 men rode down. Halfway down the shale road, they passed another horse coming up. A big bay. Well-groomed. Rider in a beaver coat. Cyrus Broderick. Rourke touched his hat to him. Broderick did not touch his hat back. Broderick sat his horse on the shale road and watched Rourke's men ride away. He watched them for a long time. Then he turned his horse, without ever coming up to the cave, and he rode back down. Adelia saw him do it. She did not know what it meant. But she watched. Cyrus Broderick did not sleep that night. He lay in his bed in his big house on the west edge of town. His wife slept beside him. The clock in the hall struck 1. Struck 2. Struck 3. He got up. He went to the window. He stood in his nightshirt and looked out at the dark. Because he could see the ridge from his window. Not really. It was too dark. But he knew it was there. He knew which direction to look. He kept looking. His wife's voice came from the bed.
"Cyrus." "Yes." "What are you doing?" "Thinking." "About what?"
He did not answer for a moment. Then he said,
"About a woman I laughed at." His wife sat up, She was a small woman with gray hair in a braid. She had been married to him for 31 years. She knew that voice. She said,
"The Ellsworth woman."
"Yes."
"At the auction."
"Yes."
"Cyrus, you laughed with everybody else. That does not make you worse than anyone. That is exactly what makes me worse than anyone. Because I could have been the one who did not laugh. I could have been the one to say, 'Gentlemen, that woman just bought this ridge for $10, and if she is willing to do it, maybe we should ask her why.' I could have said that. I did not. I laughed."
His wife was quiet.
She said, "Cyrus, what do you know?" "I know Wendell Rourke rode up there today with 3 men and a rifle."
"Oh." "Yes."
"Oh, Cyrus."
He turned from the window.
He said, "I laughed at a woman who is building something none of us could. And now the wolves are up there. And I am down here in a big warm bed."
His wife pulled the covers back on his side.
She said,
"Come to bed."
He came. He did not sleep. But he came. Winifred started coughing on a Friday. It was a small cough at first, the kind you barely notice. She was reading to Thaddeus by the fire, and she coughed twice into her sleeve, and Louetta looked over and Louetta said, "Win, you all right?" And Winifred said, "I'm fine," and she kept reading. By Saturday the cough was deeper. By Sunday she was hot to the touch. By Sunday night she was not reading. She was lying on the pallet against the warm wall, and her breath was coming fast and shallow, and there was a rattle in it that Adelia knew. Adelia had heard that rattle before. She had heard it in her mother when she was a girl. She had heard it in a neighbor's baby 2 winters ago. She had heard it, God help her, in her own husband's chest the week he took the fever the year before the mine, back when they had thought fever was the worst thing that could happen to their family. She knew what the rattle meant. She knelt beside Winifred. She put her hand on her daughter's forehead. She said,
Win, look at me."
Winifred's eyes opened. They were bright. Too bright.
"Mama, how do you feel?"
"Cold."
"You're burning up."
"I know." Adelia stood. She turned to Louetta. Louetta was already reaching for the coat. Adelia said,
"I have to go to town."
Louetta said, "I know."
"I will bring a doctor."
"Dell." "Nobody in that town will." "I will bring a doctor."
Louetta stopped talking. Adelia put on the coat. She wrapped a scarf around her head. She looked at her sister.
She said, "If she gets worse, if the rattle gets deeper, keep her upright. Prop her up. Do not let her lie flat. I know. Steam. Boil water. Hold her face over it. I know. Do not let her out of your sight. Adelia. Go."
She went.
She saddled the mule.
She rode down the ridge in the dark. The moon was almost full, and the shale was silver under it, and the mule did not want to go, and she did not care, because she pulled it forward with a rope, and she said, "Walk, walk, walk," and it walked.
Copper Bluff was 5 miles. She made it in an hour. She went to the doctor's house first. Dr. Halverson. Old. Rich. He had been the town doctor for 20 years. His house was the second biggest on Main Street. She knocked. His wife came to the door. She was in a nightcap. She held a candle.
"Yes, Mrs. Halverson. My daughter is sick."
"I need the doctor."
The woman looked at her. She recognized her. Adelia saw the moment the recognition came into her face. The moment the door began to close. Adelia put her hand against it.
She said, "Please." She is 9 years old. The woman said, "My husband is asleep. Wake him. He does not go up to Wolfstone Ridge. She is a child." He does not go up there, Mrs. Ellsworth. I am sorry.
The door closed. Adelia stood on the porch. She did not move. She could not move. Then someone said, quietly from the street,
Mrs. Ellsworth.
She turned. A woman was standing at the bottom of the porch steps. She was young, maybe 26. She wore a long coat over what looked like a nightgown.
She was holding a leather bag. Adelia said.
Who are you?
The woman said.
My name is Isadora Cross. I am a doctor. I moved here in August. I heard you knock from across the street. You're a doctor. Yes, a real one. University of Michigan, class of '85. I have my papers if you want to see them. I do not want to see your papers.
I want you to come with me right now. Where? Wolfstone Ridge.
Isadora Cross looked up the dark street. She looked at the closed door of Dr. Halverson's house. She said,
Give me a saddle.
They rode past Halloran's general store on the way out of town. The store was locked, but Ambrose Halloran was on the sidewalk. He was locking the door.
He had come in early to do the ledgers, before dawn, because that was the kind of man he was. He saw the two women ride past. He saw Adelia's face. He stepped out into the street. He said,
Mrs. Ellsworth.
She reined in. She was too tired to be polite. She said,
Not now, Mr. Halloran. My girl is sick.
He said,
Wait. He went back into the store. He came out a minute later with a paper sack. He held it up to her on the mule. He said,
Cough syrup. Flour. Little bit of honey. For the children. Not for you. Understand?
She stared at him. He said,
Do not thank me. And do not tell anyone. I have a store to keep open, Mrs. Ellsworth. I cannot afford it to be known.
She took the sack. She said,
Ambrose.
He said,
Not for you. For the children.
He turned around and went back into his store and shut the door. The two women rode up the ridge together. Isadora Cross did not ask any questions. She just rode. When they came into the cave, Louetta was holding Winifred upright against her chest by the fire.
Thaddeus was asleep on the far side of the cave, with Ash pressed against his back. Isadora Cross took one look at Winifred and started giving orders. She said,
Boil water. All you have. Now!
Louetta went. Isadora unpacked her bag. She took out a stethoscope. She listened to Winifred's chest. She frowned. Then, for one moment, she stopped. She lifted her head. She looked around the cave. She said,
This air.
Adelia said.
What? This air. It is dry. It is warm. It is clean. There is no mold. There is no damp. How is this possible? The mountain. The mountain what? The mountain breathes.
Isadora Cross looked at her. She said,
Mrs. Ellsworth, if your girl had this fever in any cabin down in that valley, we would be having a very different conversation right now.
Do you understand me?
Adelia said.
Yes. Good. Now give me the honey.
She stayed 3 days. She did not sleep the first night. She sat beside Winifred, and she wiped the girl's forehead, and she gave her small sips of hot water with honey, and she made her breathe steam from a pot every hour. By the second night, the fever broke.
By the third morning, Winifred sat up and asked for bread. Isadora Cross wept then, just for a second, alone by the fire, while Adelia was outside checking the sheep. She wiped her face on her sleeve, and no one saw. But she wept, because she was 26 years old, and she was very tired, and she had not saved every child she had tried to save, and this one she had. She stayed one more day after that. She wrote in a small notebook the whole time. Not about Winifred. About the cave. About the air. About the temperature. About the humidity. She held her hand over the crack in the ceiling, and she felt the warm air rising. She held her hand against the wet wall, where the drips came down. She wrote, and she did not explain what she was writing. When she left, she stood at the mouth of the cave in the gray afternoon light. She said,
"Mrs. Ellsworth,"
Adelia said,
"Dr. Cross, I will not take payment. I did not offer any. I do not have any." "Good. That makes it simpler."
She paused. She said,
"May I come back?"
Adelia said,
"You may come back any day of your life." Isadora Cross nodded once. Then she rode down the shale. The wind changed direction on the 4th of December. Adelia was outside checking the sheep pen. She felt it on the back of her neck. A cold breath that had not been there 10 minutes before, coming from the northwest instead of the west. She looked at the sky. The sky was too bright. That kind of bright that means something is coming. Behind her, Ash barked. Once. Sharp. Toward the western horizon. Then again. Louetta came out. "Delaware. I feel it. The sheep are jumping." "I know." "How long?" "An hour. Maybe 2.
They looked west together. The horizon was clean. Then it was not. A low white shape had appeared along the edge of the earth, far away at the place where the mountain started. It was moving. It was moving toward them. It was not a cloud. Clouds do not move like that. Clouds do not have a bottom edge that sits on the ground and stays there. Louetta whispered,
"Dodd."
Adelia did not answer. She turned toward the cave. She said,
"Get every animal inside. Now!" "All of them. The mule too. Now, Lou! Now!"
Louetta ran. Adelia stood one more second at the edge of the shale. She watched the white wall come. She thought about Elias Thorne. She thought about the tin cup. She thought about the mountain that had held him for 10 years and had tried to hold him longer. Then she went inside and shut the bar across the cave mouth. The bar went across the cave mouth at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By 4:30, they could not see the sheep pen from the entrance. By 5, the light was gone. The blizzard did not arrive. It did not roll in. It did not sweep across. It hit, like a hand, like a fist. The whole white wall came off the mountains and struck Wolfstone Ridge and kept going. Wind that was not wind. Wind that was a solid thing. It pushed the timbers of the barrier, and the timbers groaned, and Adelia and Louetta stood inside the cave, with their shoulders against the wood, and they held. The mule screamed. Ash was under Thaddeus's coat. Winifred was inside the small cabin they had built at the back. She was better but still weak. She was sitting up. She was watching everything. Louetta shouted over the wind.
"How long?" "I don't know." "Delaware." "How long?" 2 days.
3.
"I don't know, Lou." "I don't know."
They braced the bar. They wedged it. They packed the seams with rags. The wind found the seams anyway. Fine snow blew in like flour through the cracks. It lay in white lines across the cave floor. It settled on the sheep. It settled on Thaddeus's hair. He brushed it off. It settled again. Adelia looked at the little cabin at the back of the cave. The little cabin they had built with 61 dragged logs and split cottonwood and clay from the creek and a stove made of flat stones and old iron. The little cabin that had a fire in it. The little cabin that was warm. She said,
"Everyone inside the cabin."
"Now,"
Louetta said.
"the sheep." The sheep have the pen. The pen has the overhang. They will be cold, but they will live. We go inside. The mule? The mule goes in the antechamber. Rope him. He will kick if he panics. Dell?
Now, Louetta. They went. The cabin was small, 10 feet by 12. The stove was in the middle.
The walls were double logs packed with clay. There were 2 pallets on the floor. There was 1 shelf. There was a small square window covered in oil paper. 4 people. 1 dog. 1 stove. Adelia shut the door. The wind became a distant thing. Muffled. Wrapped in cave and cabin and clay and log. The 4 of them stood inside the little box. Thaddeus said,
"Mama."
"Yes. Are we going to be all right?"
She knelt down. She put both her hands on his shoulders. She looked in his eyes. She was 36 years old, and she had lost her husband, and her home, and her land, and her name, and she had 1 child, and 1 nephew, and 1 sister, and 1 dog, and a fire. She said,
"Yes, Thaddeus. We are going to be all right."
He said,
"Because Mama says."
She said,
"Because Mama says."
He nodded once. Then he went to sit next to Ash. That was Wednesday night. The wind did not stop. Thursday. The wind did not stop. The wind was a sound now. Not a weather. A sound. It filled the cave. It filled the cabin.
It filled their heads. Louetta caught herself listening for a pause in it, and there was no pause in it. There was never going to be a pause in it. This was the world now. This wind. This dark. This stove. She fed the fire. She fed the fire again. She counted the logs. Adelia said,
"Don't count. I have to count. Do not count out loud."
"Sorry."
She counted in her head. They had wood for 6 days if they were careful. Careful, 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 careful. Ash slept across Thaddeus's feet. Every hour or so his ear would twitch, and he would lift his head and listen, and then he would put his head back down. Winifred read Little Women to Thaddeus. She read the same chapter 3 times.
She did not know she was doing it. Thaddeus did not know either. He was listening to her voice, not the words. Her voice was steady. Her voice was there. That was all he needed. Adelia sat by the door. She watched her sister feed the fire. She watched her daughter read. She watched her nephew's small hand rest on the dog's back. She thought, "This is what I have. This is all of it. This is what I am protecting." Then she thought, "This is enough." Thursday night, the knock came. At first they did not hear it. Because the wind. Because the wind was everything. Because a knock inside a blizzard is like a whisper inside a scream. But Ash lifted his head. He was on his feet before anyone else moved. His ears were forward. His tail was down. He faced the cabin door. He growled. Not at the door. At what was beyond it. Then he barked. Once. Sharp. Louetta stood up. Adelia said,
"Wait. Delegate, someone is out there." "Wait." "Ash. Quiet."
Ash quieted. They listened. The wind. The wind. The wind. Then, very faint. Almost swallowed. Under the wind. A voice. A man's voice. Words they could not make out. But a voice. And behind the voice, a smaller one. A child. Crying. Louetta was already at the door. She had the bar up before Adelia could speak. She opened the cabin door. She crossed the cave. She threw her weight against the cave mouth barrier. Adelia followed. Together they lifted the beam. The wind came in and knocked Louetta backward 2 full steps. Snow came in with it. A wall of it. White and roaring. And inside the white for shapes. 2 adults. 2 small ones. Louetta grabbed the nearest one. Pulled. It was a child. A boy. Maybe 7 years old. His face was blue. His lips were the color of a bruise. She pulled him inside. Adelia grabbed the woman. Pulled. The man came last, dragging the other child. He was staggering. His coat was frozen stiff. He was so covered in ice that Adelia did not know who he was until she pulled off his hat and saw the beard. Cyrus Broderick, the rancher, the one who laughed. He fell to his knees just inside the cave mouth. He said, "Please." That was all. Just the word please. Louetta already had the bar back down. Adelia already had the boy in her arms. She was already carrying him to the cabin. Louetta had the girl. Broderick's wife was on her hands and knees crawling toward the light of the cabin door, because her legs would not stand her up. Broderick himself dragged himself in behind them. He was crying. Silently. Big man. Beaver coat. Face wet. He was crying without a sound. They packed 6 people and 1 dog and 1 stove into a 10 by 12 cabin. They stripped the wet coats. They wrapped the children in every blanket they owned. Louetta pulled off the boy's frozen boots and set his bare feet against her own belly under her dress, because Isadora Cross had told her once that was the fastest way to warm a child's feet without burning them. The boy sobbed. The girl did not sob. The girl just stared. Broderick's wife tried to speak. Her lips would not shape the words. Adelia held a tin cup of warm water to her mouth. She said, "Small sips. Small. Do not gulp." The woman drank. Broderick sat against the wall. He did not speak. He watched. He watched Louetta warm his son's feet against her own body. He watched Adelia hold a cup for his wife. He watched Winifred, thin and just recovered Winifred, take his daughter's cold hand in both of her own and rub it. He watched Thaddeus, 6 years old, take off his own coat and lay it over Broderick's boy without being asked. He watched. His face did not change. Water ran down it. Broderick's wife found her voice first. She said, "The roof." Adelia said, "What?" "The main roof. The house. It came down. Wednesday night. All of it. We tried the barn. The barn came down at dawn." "How did you get here?" "He carried the boy. I carried the girl. 3 miles. 3 miles. He said there was a cave. He said the widow at the cave. He said if we could reach it." The woman started shaking. Adelia held her. The woman said into Adelia's shoulder, "I did not think we would reach it." Broderick was still sitting against the wall. His mouth moved. He said, quiet, "I did not either." The night went. The wind did not stop. The stove burned. Louetta fed it carefully. Wood, careful. She had recounted. They had wood for 4 days now, with 2 more mouths. Then 3. She did not tell Adelia. Adelia knew anyway. Around midnight, the boy came off Louetta's lap and crawled across the small floor to Thaddeus. He was 7. He was scared. He was in a stranger's cave in a storm, and he did not want to be alone. He got under Thaddeus's blanket. Thaddeus made room. He said, "It's okay." The boy said, "I want my mama." Thaddeus said, "She's right there. See." The boy looked. His mother was 3 feet away. She was asleep now, with Adelia's shawl over her. He said, "Oh." Thaddeus said, "I know. It's hard to see her when it's dark." Then Thaddeus said, "Do you like dogs?" The boy said, "I don't know." Thaddeus said, This is Ash. Ash is good.
Ash thumped his tail once against the floor. The boy put his hand out. He touched the dog's back. He held on. The two boys and one dog slept like that until morning. Broderick watched them. He watched them the whole night. Friday morning, Thaddeus was gone. Not far.
Not outside. Not lost. But Adelia woke and counted heads, and there were 5, where there should have been 6, and her heart stopped. Louetta was up before Adelia was on her feet.
Thad.
No answer.
Thaddeus.
No answer. Adelia was out of the cabin, into the cave. Ash was gone too. That was the only thing that kept her from screaming. Ash was gone. Ash was with him. Wherever he was, the dog was with him. Winifred said, from behind her.
Mama. Not now, when? Mama. I know where he is.
Adelia turned.
Where? The back. What back? The back of the cave. Where the drips are. He goes there sometimes. Since when?
Winifred looked at the floor. She said,
Since always.
Since we came. He goes there when he thinks nobody sees. He talks to the wall.
Adelia looked at her daughter.
He talks to the wall.
Yes.
When?
Yes.
Why did you not tell me?
Winifred looked up. Her eyes were older than her face. She said,
Because it was his.
Adelia stopped. She stood in the mouth of the cabin doorway, and she stopped, and she looked at her 9-year-old daughter, and she understood, in one flat, clean moment, that Winifred was already a person.
Not a child pretending to be a person. A person. With her own reasons. With her own knowledge of her cousin's small private grief. With her own opinions about what belonged to whom. She said,
Show me.
Winifred took her hand. They walked to the back of the cave together. The back of the cave was deeper than Adelia had ever gone. It narrowed. The ceiling came down. The walls came in. You had to duck under a limestone shelf. Then it opened again into a small chamber where the drips came down the wet wall, and the tin channel caught them, and the wooden bucket sat below. Thaddeus was sitting on the stone floor. His back was against the wet wall. Ash was pressed against his side. The boy was talking. Softly, not to Ash. To the stone. Winifred stopped Adelia, with a hand on her arm. She put her finger to her lips. The two of them stood in the shadow and listened. Thaddeus was saying,
So we have 12 sheep now. And Ash. And the water is working. Mama fixed the water. Well, Winifred fixed the water. Mama helped.
Pause.
The mule is scared of the wind.
He was crying yesterday. I gave him some of my bread. He liked it.
Pause.
Papa, I still have your biscuit.
Pause. Adelia's hand went to her mouth. Thaddeus said,
It's in my other coat. In the pocket. It got hard. I know you can't eat it now. But I kept it. In case you came.
Pause. He said quietly,
I don't think you're coming, Papa.
Pause.
But it's okay. Because Mama came. And Aunt Delaware. And Win. And Ash. And now there's a boy. His name is Henry. He's my age almost.
Pause. Adelia was crying. Silently. The way Broderick had cried the night before. Silently. Thaddeus said,
So it's okay, Papa. It's okay you can't come. I have people. I have a dog. I'm not scared anymore.
He put his hand flat against the wet stone. He said,
I love you. Bye, Papa.
He stood up. He was 6 years old. He turned around. He saw his mother and his cousin standing in the shadow. He did not run to them. He walked. Slow. Steady. Ash walked beside him. He came to Adelia, and he stopped in front of her.
He looked up. He said,
"I said goodbye."
She said,
"I heard you."
He said,
"Is that okay?"
She said,
"Yes, Thaddeus. That is okay."
He said,
"When? Did you hear me too?"
Winifred was crying now. She nodded. Thaddeus took her hand. He said,
"Good."
Then the three of them walked back to the cabin together. At the mouth of the small chamber, just behind the limestone shelf, where nobody had known he was standing, Cyrus Broderick was on his knees. He had gone looking for the boy too. He had heard everything. He was on his knees on the stone, with his big hands over his face and his shoulders shaking. None of them said anything to him. Adelia and Winifred and Thaddeus walked past. They pretended they did not see, because there are moments a man has to have alone, and if you have any grace at all, you give them to him. The wind stopped on Saturday morning. It did not slow. It stopped, between one breath and the next, like a door had been closed on it. Then silence. Louetta was the one who noticed first. She was feeding the fire, and she paused, with a log in her hand, and she said,
"Delaware."
Adelia said,
"I hear it. There's nothing to hear. I hear it." They opened the cabin door. The cave was gray, dim, but daylight came through the crack in the ceiling. Actual daylight, not the sick white glow of blizzard. Sunday. They went to the mouth of the cave. Snow was packed against the bar in a solid wall. They dug for 4 hours. Broderick dug with him, silent, with a piece of split log for a shovel, because there was only one real shovel, and Adelia was using it. He dug until his hands bled, and then he dug more. When they broke through, the light was blinding. The valley below was white. Everything white. Everything. Fences gone. Roads gone. Cabins buried up to their eaves. A dead cottonwood snapped in half in the middle of the shale road, the top of it lying 20 feet from the trunk. Broderick stood at the cave mouth and looked down. He did not speak for a long time. Then he said, "That is my whole place. Under that."
Adelia said.
"I know."
He said.
"My cattle."
She said.
"Some of them will be alive."
He said.
"Not many."
She said.
"No, not many."
He nodded. He said.
"Mrs. Ellsworth."
She said.
"Yes."
He said.
"You open the door."
"I will not forget it. Neither will this valley."
She looked at him. He looked back. That was all he said. That was enough. He walked back into the cave to his wife and children. Adelia stood at the mouth alone. She looked out at the buried valley. She said quietly to nobody,
"Mama came."
Then she turned around and went inside. The Broderick family stayed 2 more days.
By the third day the roads were passable in the way roads are passable after a killing storm, which is to say they were not passable, but you could get through them anyway if you were desperate and had a horse. Broderick walked to town alone that morning. He came back at dusk with a wagon and a driver and blankets and food and a doctor. Isadora Cross was on the wagon. She had insisted. The Broderick family went home. Before they left, the wife took Adelia's hands. She was a small woman. Her name was Margaret. She had not spoken very much in 3 days. She said,
"Mrs. Ellsworth."
She said,
"Adelia."
She said,
"I will not forget this. Not ever. Not one day of my life."
Adelia said,
"Margaret."
"Go take care of your children."
Margaret nodded.
She said, "I am going to make sure the whole valley knows what you did."
Adelia said,
"Please do not."
Margaret looked surprised. She said,
"Why?" Adelia said. Because I do not want thanks. I want peace.
Margaret held her hands harder.
She said, Adelia, in this valley, thanks is how you get peace. Let me thank you loud. Please.
Adelia looked at her.
She said, all right.
Margaret got in the wagon. Broderick tipped his hat to Adelia from the driver's seat.
He did not smile. He did not need to.
The wagon rolled down the shale. Winter came and went the way winters do, when you have already survived the worst thing they can do to you.
They ate carefully. They rationed the wood. They lost one sheep to the cold in January, a small ewe that had been limping since October. They buried her by the twisted cedar, because the ground under the cedar had a little give from the roots. Thaddeus stopped talking to the wall. He did not need to any more. He talked to Ash instead. He talked to his mother. He talked to Winifred. He read Little Women with her by the fire, and he asked her questions about the words he did not know. Winifred started teaching him letters. Adelia had been a teacher. She had taught the girl. Now the girl was teaching the boy. It happened the way water finds its channel. Without discussion. Without a lesson plan. Because there was time, and there was a fire, and there was a 9-year-old girl who liked books, and a 6-year-old boy who liked his cousin. By March, Thaddeus could write his name. He wrote it on the wall of the small chamber at the back, where he had said goodbye to his father. He wrote it in charcoal. Thaddeus. Then he wrote another word next to it. Papa. Then he came out, and did not go back for a long time. Wendell Rourke came back on the 18th of March. He came with a lawyer. The lawyer's name was Prescott. He was from Bozeman. He wore a good suit. He had a briefcase. He rode in a hired buggy with a fringed top, and he handled the reins like a man who had not touched a horse in 10 years. They came up the shale road at mid-morning. Adelia saw them from the mouth of the cave. She said,
Louetta, I see. Get the children inside the cabin. Delaware. Get them inside. Delaware. What are you going to do?
Adelia turned to her sister. She said,
I am going to listen. And then I am going to talk. And you are going to listen too. And you are going to remember every word he says, because we may need it later. Louetta went for the children. Adelia walked out to meet the buggy. She wore her black dress. She wore her hat. She did not wear her coat. It was cold, and she did not care. She wanted Rourke to look at her and see the same woman he had seen in October. Same dress. Same hat. Same face. Not moved. Not softened. Not 1 inch.
Rourke did not smile this time. The lawyer did. Prescott took off his hat. He said,
Mrs. Ellsworth.
She said,
Sir, my name is Nathaniel Prescott. I represent the Copper Bluff Mining Company. I am here on a legal matter. I have documents. May I present them?
She said,
You may hand them to me. You may not come off that buggy. Prescott's smile flickered. He handed her the papers. She read them standing there in the cold, with the wind pulling her hair. She read them slowly. They said, in short, that the Copper Bluff Mining Company had, in the year 1882, purchased mineral rights beneath a parcel known as Wolfstone Ridge from a previous surveyor of record. That such mineral rights were separate from surface title.
That the company was therefore entitled to enter the parcel and remove subsurface or regardless of surface ownership. That any obstruction of such removal would be pursued in the courts of Montana Territory. Adelia read the whole thing twice. She looked up. She said,
Mr. Prescott.
He said,
Yes.
She said,
This is a forgery.
His face did not move. He said,
Ma'am, I would advise you to have a lawyer of your own examine, she said. I do not need a lawyer to know this is a forgery.
There was no surveyor of record for this parcel in 1882. The parcel was not surveyed until 1884, and it was surveyed by a man named John McKinley of the Territorial Land Office, who is dead, and whose records are in Helena, and whose seal on any document dated 1882 would be a fraud. Also, your paper is too white. Paper from 1882 does not look like that.
Prescott's smile was gone now. Rourke's hands tightened on the reins. Adelia said,
"Take your paper. Get off my ridge. See you in Bozeman."
She walked away from them. She did not look back. She heard the buggy turn. She heard the wheels crunch down the shale. She waited until she was inside the cave. Then her knees gave. Louetta caught her. She said,
Delegate Delaware.
Adelia said,
I need to sit down.
She sat down. She put her head between her knees. She said,
Lou, I do not know if I bluffed him.
Louetta said,
You did not bluff him. I made up the part about the paper. Delaware. It was still true. Was it?
Yes.
It was still true.
Adelia laughed.
Once. A short cracked laugh. She said,
Then we are going to Bozeman.
The court date was set for the 5th of April. Cyrus Broderick paid for the lawyer. He rode up the ridge himself on a Tuesday. He came alone. He said he had been in touch with a man named Holloway in Bozeman who did not lose cases when the other side was lying. He said Holloway was already looking at the papers Prescott had served. He said Adelia should not worry about the fee. Adelia said,
Mr. Broderick, I cannot accept this.
He said,
Mrs. Ellsworth, you did not accept it. I decided it. That is different.
She said,
I do not want to be indebted.
He said,
Ma'am, do you understand what indebted means?
Because I do. I owe you my son. I owe you my daughter. I owe you my wife. And I owe you 30 years of not laughing at any more women I do not understand. So please, accept the lawyer. It is not a gift. It is a payment. And it is not enough.
She looked at him. She said,
You have changed, Mr. Broderick.
He said,
No, ma'am. I woke up. That is different.
There was one more thing. He said it before he left. He said,
Mrs. Ellsworth, I hired a survey. In February. Quietly. A geologist out of Butte. He came up to the ridge one afternoon, while you were down at the creek, and I paid him to look, and I paid him twice to keep his mouth shut.
She said,
Mr. Broderick.
He said,
Wait. Hear me. He walked the ridge for 4 hours. He tested the rock. He looked at the map that Rourke's people had shown me 2 years ago when I was thinking of investing. Because I almost invested, Mrs. Ellsworth. Almost. Before your husband died. Before all of it.
She said,
And.
He said,
And there is no copper vein under this cave. There is copper on the far side of the ridge, deep. Not commercial. Not worth digging. Rourke's people knew it. Rourke's people have been telling their investors for 5 years that this ridge is rich because they need it to be rich. If it is not rich, they lose the investors. Do you understand?
She said slowly,
They wanted the parcel to hide the truth.
He said,
They wanted the parcel to keep the story going. As long as they own it, and nobody digs, they can keep selling shares in an idea. If somebody like you owns it, and lets a real geologist look, the whole thing falls apart.
She said,
So the company is a lie.
He said,
The company is a lie. And I have the geologist's signed report. And he will testify.
She sat down on a rock. She said. Mr. Broderick? He said. Yes. She said. You did all this in February. He said. Yes. She said. You did all this before Rourke even came back. He said. Yes. She said. Why? He said. Because I was awake, ma'am. And once a man is awake he cannot pretend to be asleep. The courthouse in Bozeman had white columns and a green dome. Adelia had never been inside a room that large in her life. The gallery was full. Rourke had made noise. Rourke had told his investors. The investors had come to watch. So had reporters. So had ranchers from 3 counties who had heard the story about the widows and the cave and the blizzard and Broderick and the little boy and the biscuit. They were all there. Louetta sat in the front row of the gallery. She held Winifred's hand. Thaddeus stayed home with Ash and Isadora Cross. Holloway the lawyer was a tall, thin man with a voice like a bell. He put Adelia on the stand for 11 minutes. He asked her about the parcel. He asked her about the deed. He asked her when she had first heard of any company claim to the mineral rights. She said, in October of last year, from Mr. Wendell Rourke, who offered me $200 for the parcel. Holloway said, and when he made that offer, did he mention any prior mineral rights claim held by his company? She said, he did not. He did not say his company already held such rights. He did not. He tried to buy them from you. Yes, which he would not have done if his company already owned them. Correct. Holloway smiled. It was a small, tight lawyer's smile. He said, no further questions. Then he called Cyrus Broderick. Broderick took the stand in a dark suit. He looked bigger up there than he did on his horse. Holloway said, Mr. Broderick, please state your name and occupation. He said, Cyrus Broderick, cattleman, Bitter Creek Valley. Holloway said, Mr. Broderick, are you familiar with the Copper Bluff Mining Company? He said, very familiar. They approached me in 1885 for investment. Did you invest? I almost did. I did not. Why? Because I hired a geologist to verify their claims. And their claims were false. The gallery moved. A soft sound. A wave of held breath. Holloway said, you have that geologist's report. He said, I do. He is also present in this courtroom. He is prepared to testify. The prosecution's lawyer stood up. Prescott. He was pale. He said, objection. Foundation. The judge, an old man, with a face like split leather, said, overruled. Sit down, Mr. Prescott. Continue, Mr. Holloway. Holloway continued. He continued for 20 minutes. By the end of the 20 minutes, everyone in the courtroom knew that Rourke's company was selling shares in a copper vein that did not exist, and that the papers Prescott had served on Wolfstone Ridge were forged in an attempt to seize the parcel before any independent geologist could look at it and expose the whole scheme. Rourke sat at the defendant's table. He did not look at Adelia. He did not look at anyone. He looked at his own hands. The judge ruled from the bench. He ruled in 1 minute. He said, the claims of the Copper Bluff Mining Company against Mrs. Adelia Ellsworth are dismissed with prejudice. The documents submitted by counsel for the plaintiff are hereby referred to the territorial attorney for investigation of forgery. Mr. Rourke will remain in Bozeman pending charges. He struck the bench with his gavel. He said, court is adjourned. Mrs. Ellsworth. Good luck to you, ma'am. Adelia stood up. She had one. She did not feel like she had one. She felt like she was going to fall down. Louetta was suddenly beside her. Winifred was suddenly beside her. Winifred said, Mama. Adelia said. Yes. Winifred said. We keep the cave. Adelia said. We keep the cave. Winifred smiled. It was the first time in a year that Adelia had seen her daughter smile in daylight in a public place, with strangers around her. The smile went through Adelia like a bell. Spring came late that year, but it came. Snow melted off Wolfstone Ridge in long uneven streaks. Grass pushed up through the shale in places nobody expected. The twisted cedar put out new needles at the tips of its dead branches. The sheep lambed in April. 9 lambs from 11 ewes. Better than anyone would have predicted from that flock. Winifred kept a chart with all their names. Thaddeus named half of them. Louetta cried the first time one of the lambs wobbled up on its legs, and then she laughed at herself for crying, and then she cried again. They planted a garden by the south face, where the shale was thinnest, the way Josiah Rennick had told them. Beans, squash, turnip. Some of it came up. Not all. But some was enough. Ambrose Halloran started coming up the ridge on the first Sunday of every month. He never brought a receipt. He always brought something. Flour, salt, a small bag of coffee. He never accepted thanks. He always said, "For the children," and then he rode down. By June he had said, "For the children," so many times that Thaddeus started calling him uncle for the children. Josiah Rennick came up every other week. He taught Winifred to shoot a small rifle he had brought her, one that was sized for her arms. Isadora Cross came whenever she could. She wrote her notebooks. She measured the air. She said the words, geothermal circulation, for the first time in that cave in July of 1888, and she wrote them in her book, and she underlined them. Cyrus Broderick rebuilt his ranch that year with borrowed money. He rebuilt it smaller. He had learned things. He came up the ridge once a month too. He did not bring flour. He brought books. He said his wife had insisted. He said his wife had said, "Cyrus, that girl on the ridge is a reader. Bring her books." Winifred read every book he brought. She read them twice. Then she loaned them to Thaddeus. Then she loaned them back to Broderick's boy, Henry, who came up sometimes on his own pony and sat by the fire and let Thaddeus explain the rules of Little Women to him. The years went on. They always do. The valley called the place Cave Home Ridge by 1890. By 1895, Adelia had built a proper cabin outside the cave for the summer months, and kept the small cabin inside for winters. She had bought 40 more acres of the low ground, and turned it into pasture. She was not rich. She would never be rich. But she owed no man anything, and she slept under her own roof, and she had raised her daughter, and her nephew, and she had done it on land nobody had wanted. Nathaniel Ellsworth lost the family ranch in a bad cattle deal in 1893, and moved back east, and was never heard from again. Wendell Rourke served 4 years in the Deer Lodge Penitentiary for forgery and fraud. He came out. He went somewhere. Nobody in the valley knew where. Nobody in the valley asked. Louetta married a widower named Silas Barrow in 1896. He was a schoolteacher in Copper Bluff. He was a quiet man. He was good to Thaddeus. He was good to Louetta. She kept coming up to the ridge every week to see her sister. She kept laughing more. She let herself. Winifred went to normal school in Bozeman in 1898. She came back. She always came back. In 1917, the Medical Journal of the State of Montana published a short paper by Dr. Isadora Cross of Copper Bluff. The paper was titled, "Observations on Sustained Human Habitation in a Limestone Cavern System, Wolfstone Ridge, Montana, 1887 to 1917. It described low humidity, steady warm air circulation from a deep geothermal source,
unusual absence of mold, mildew, or respiratory illness among habitual occupants. It noted, in careful language, that the two sisters, who had first occupied the cavern, and their descendants had experienced a rate of pulmonary disease markedly below the regional average. The paper was quoted in one national journal. It was reprinted in a mining engineer's bulletin. It was mostly forgotten, but it existed. Someone had written it down. In the same year, Winifred Ellsworth, 39 years old, unmarried, principal of her own small school, opened the doors of Cave Home Ridge to the children of the valley, whose families could not afford the town's school. She taught them in the outer chamber of the cave, where the light came in, and the air was warm in winter, and cool in summer. She taught them letters. She taught them arithmetic. She taught them Latin, because she believed in Latin. She taught them, when they asked, about the woman who had bought this ridge for $10 in 1887. She always said,
"That was my mother."
She always said, she was very brave. But mostly she was very stubborn. And where I come from, we do not always tell the difference.
Thaddeus became a doctor in Helena. He came up to the ridge every August with his wife and his own 2 children. He always went to the small chamber at the back of the cave. He always stood in front of the wall, where he had written his name in charcoal 30 years before. The charcoal was still there. Thaddeus, "Papa." He always touched it once, lightly, with 2 fingers. Then he came back out and had supper with his aunt. Adelia Ellsworth died in 1919. She was 68 years old. She was in her own bed. Winifred was holding her hand. Louetta was on the other side of the bed. Thaddeus had been there the day before and had gone back to Helena, and would always regret that he had not stayed one more day. She was buried by the twisted cedar, under the same ground where they had buried the first ewe in the winter of '87. There is a stone marker there. The stone marker says, Adelia Ellsworth, 1851 to 1919. Beloved sister, mother, teacher. Below her name, cut into the same stone, in the same hand, there is a second line. It says, "We know what is it."
A landlord.
The children who go to the school in the cave still ask what it means. Winifred always says the same thing. She says,
"It means my mother knew what was worth keeping, and she never let anybody tell her otherwise."
So here is what to take home. 2 sisters, 1 mountain, $10, and a winter that nobody in the valley ever forgot.
If you have ever been laughed at, if you have ever been turned away, if you have ever had to start over after everyone told you it was too late, this story is yours. Because what the world calls worthless is sometimes the very thing that saves your life. And a piece of ground nobody wanted can turn into the strongest house in the valley if the right woman is standing on it. And here is the harder part. The part for all of us. We judge too quickly. We are wrong more than we know. And the kindness you show to a stranger in a storm is not weakness. It is the one thing that separates a good valley from a hard one. Cyrus Broderick learned it the long way. Most of us do. Adelia Ellsworth bought a piece of land nobody wanted. She built a cave into a home. And when the man who had laughed at her came knocking in the middle of a blizzard, she opened the door. That is why we still tell the story, almost 140 years later. If this story meant something to you, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight.